greatest risks are sometimes the greatest opportunities, aren't they? Crisis presents opportunity, and the sporting community offers an amazing platform to be able to get that messaging across.
We've got some fresh new young talent doing some things that I know you haven't heard before.
1, 2, 3, listen.
Welcome to Finances, your home for all things financial, investment, money and lifestyle. Hosted and curated by the very talented team of certified financial planners, Burke Britton Financial Partners.
So this is the Finances podcast, episode number 116. I was thinking about today's guest. I was thinking about a breakfast. No, it was a lunch that we went to a few weeks ago. It was a Read the Play breakfast run by Michelle Gertz, and they had Cameron Ling and Maddie Brown as the co-hosts of that lunch. And I was kind of looking around, reflecting on, and we're just saying this off air beforehand, reflecting on all the people that I knew in that sort of business world, that Geelong community, and seeing just how many of those, the sort of the connective tissue of all of those individuals was sport. It was football, it was netball, and the person that I was sitting with at that lunch was today's guest, the Regional General Manager of AFL Barwon, Ed Wilson. Ed, thanks for joining me on the podcast today.
It's brilliant to be here. Thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, no worries, mate. And I know I said just before we started that I'm fairly loose and draw a fairly long bow when we talk about financial planning podcast. You know, we're a financial advisory business, but I think what I suppose is important to us as a business is our involvement in the community, and nearly all of the podcasts that we have, we tend to find the link between individuals and business and what we do as financial advisors. But I continue to be absolutely blown away by the Geelong community and just how willing people are to collaborate. And again, like I said, the connective tissue of a lot of businesses and a lot of individuals in Geelong are a sporting club. It's football, it's netball, it's basketball, it's cricket. So it's good to have you on the podcast today, mate. I know that we had a brief chat at that lunch, and I thought, listen, this would be a good conversation to extend onto the podcast. So thanks again for coming on.
No, thank you. You're very generous, and it's incredible if you think of the local community. I've been fortunate. It's a real privilege to be in my position and have been for just over 2 years now. And something that struck me since day one is very much that cohesion within the local community. Whether it's football or netball or any other sport, it really is what binds people together. And it shows that everyone can be a part of that. You don't have to be a player kicking a footy or shooting a netball. You could be a coach, you could be an umpire, you could be a volunteer. Everyone has that opportunity to contribute, and it really is, in so many respects, the fabric of a lot of communities that sit around us here in this wonderful region. Yeah,
it's crazy. Again, just off air, I said we speak too much off air and should save it for the podcast, but we went to the Geelong Business Excellence Awards on Thursday night, and again, looking around that room, lots of Geelong business leaders, community leaders, and just about all of them, I could draw a correlation between the sporting club that I knew them through as well, and the same applies with our clients. Just about, it's a lovely introduction to a conversation, or if you're struggling on drawing some sort of a connection with someone, you ask them what local club are they involved with, and pretty soon you've got, you realise that there's a half a degree of separation between yourself and that person. In Geelong, everyone knows everyone, which is a fabulous thing from a business, from a sporting point of view. It's not so great if you're doing the wrong thing in Geelong. You probably
you'll be known pretty quickly.
No, and you probably should disappear and go somewhere else. If you've listened to any of our podcasts before, Ed, you know that I like to maybe take a little step back and understand a little bit more about the guests, at least on our first conversation. So I introduce you as the Regional General Manager of AFL Barwon, but let's take a step back to where you grew up. and how you eventually found your way to this lovely part of the world.
Yeah, for me, I've spent most of my life in Brisbane, extremely privileged and fortunate in terms of the upbringing. I'm the eldest of 4 children, and as part of that, you always feel like you've got a older brother mentorship to your 3 younger siblings, to say the least. And you know, getting home to Brisbane and being able to spend time with family and friends is incredibly important and something that I'm fortunate to do often. But for me, in terms of how I've got myself to where I am today, in terms of that career piece, it very much started with that real love for sport. Sport is an industry, is a challenging one to get into. It's one that's really built on connections and experience. So for me, I was very fortunate into my undergraduate studies of law and business, and it really took me down a couple of different routes. Did I want to work in consulting? Did I want to go into aviation? Someone who loves travel, the thought of being able to travel for work all the time was always very appetizing. But sport was always that underlying passion for me. And I was really fortunate to work for Apple for 5 years, and my final role with them was in their business consulting ecosystem, and being able to work with clients to understand what's working, what are their challenges in their business environment, and to build a strategy from that to then move forward and see those changes was something that always intrinsically sat really well with me. And so then that transition to sport about 7 years ago, and it's a number of organisations since then in terms of strategic leadership roles that I've had, whether it's been with Touch Rugby League Australia, Tennis Australia, in athletics, and more recently in the last couple of years in my position within AFL Barwon. It's been able to really build that career and continue to transfer those skills and build on each experience as well. But underlying at its absolute core is that passion piece, and I feel really proud of what I get to do, but also really privileged to be able to sit back and go, you get to work in your passion in life, being sport. That's phenomenal, and I know it's not something that everyone can say in terms of their line of employment, but it comes with that phenomenal responsibility as well as to what's the legacy piece, what defines value within your role. And that's been something that I've been very conscious on, whether it is back in my Apple days or more recently through the number of sports that I've been fortunate to be a part of, is what's that legacy piece that you're leaving as you move from one role to another to make sure that you leave the place better than you found it.
So before sport was considered a career for you, so can I go maybe just hark back a little bit earlier to when you were a kid? What were you doing sport-wise, and what sort of influence did sport have either through or from your parents or with your siblings? What were you playing up in Brisbane? Did you know what AFL was or not?
No, I definitely did. And when it came to sport for me growing up, I was a sport tragic, still am, in so many respects. But I was one of those children who threw themselves into everything. So in term 1 was cricket season, term 2 was rugby season, term 3 was tennis and athletics. You had cross-country running in between there, loved my swimming, gave a go at basketball over the years as well. So when it came to sports, it was very much someone who didn't like sitting on the sidelines very much, but even to this day, love keeping myself very active in that space, but love spectating and following sport, and very much I like to say that sport is life and life is sport, and it is something that resonates for a lot of people as well. But for me growing up, that's where I really built that intrinsic passion for sport, was that involvement piece, being a part of local communities in those local clubs, and especially coming from Queensland as well. AFL back in the 2000s into the 2010s during my schooling years, it was certainly a sport that was growing, but it absolutely did not have the profile that it's got today. I was someone who followed the Brisbane Lions, and when I was 6, 7 and 8 years old was when we won our 01, 02, 03 premierships.
It's not a bad time to grow up around the Brisbane Lions
absolutely
dynasty.
No, it's very true. And seeing incredible players and seeing an incredible club, it was always something that, as someone who lived about a kilometre from the Gabba as well, was very hard to miss. But to see where the sport is growing today, you look at back then, I think of my close mates that I went to school with, and not many were interested in AFL. And now you fast forward 20 years, the same mates are absolutely loving what we see at the moment, not just from the Brisbane Lions, of course, in a premiership year, but the sport as a whole. And for me, it's always been very intrinsically passionate about a lot of sports and been involved in a lot of different sports. But a lot of that influence also comes from the family and the parents.
So what did your parents get involved in? And were your siblings also as adamant or as enthused about sport as you were?
Yeah, absolutely. My 3 younger siblings have, whether it's been hockey, whether it's been cross-country running, rugby, it's certainly, sport's always been an intrinsic part of all our lives. And it really driven from the parents as well. Mum and dad are very healthy, fit individuals and amazing inspirations in so many parts of our lives. But especially for Dad, he represented Queensland in under-20s rugby.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So very quickly, rugby became, the theme of the household in so many respects. So to be able to follow in his footsteps in many parts of life, including on the sporting field, was very special. But for me, as someone who's always been intrinsically a sports tragic, it really opened you up in terms of many different ways to participate and many different ways to actually enjoy that as a lifestyle.
What about Mum?
Mum, has always been someone who has always been very fit, very healthy, and for her, it's always been that type of exercise, especially if it's Pilates, if it's yoga, walks. It's always that very positive, well-being type of lifestyle, and that resonates down to us 4 children, if I call it that. I'm 29, my younger siblings are 25, so we've grown into young adults now. But a lot of that inspiration you get from your parents, and that influence very much sticks to today about living a healthy life, valuing well-being, and making sure that you're putting yourself in the best possible position to not only have a healthy life but enjoy everything you do. And the connections to people that come from sport is something that I truly value.
Well, I think one of the things that I was interested in, I found unique about your path in sport, is that you have sort of combined the passion for sport with the academic prowess. I mean, again, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but as a young man with a pretty impressive resume in terms of you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but you did bachelor degrees in law, business. You've done a post-grad degree in MBA. And you're 29. So that the combination of those two things, a passion for sport. Like when I was growing up, like every second person wanted to do sports management, and but not many of them actually fulfilled that ambition, or they couldn't combine the passion for sport and community with the, I suppose, business intelligence. What was it about again, back to your upbringing and maybe the influence of your parents that saw you saying, actually, I can combine these two things, the business intelligence and the passion for sport?
One of the, I suppose, most critical aspects in my life and how I like to live it is always taking opportunities in front of you. It's almost that approach or that attitude of say yes, then figure it out later. Yep. And that's something that's worked really well for me over the years. If I think back to my school days, I wanted to study medicine. It was all I ever had my eye on. And that really came intrinsically from a motivation of wanting to support people and make a difference. It was that same type of conversation at the end of year 12. I had an honest one with myself in saying, actually, you do well at biology, chemistry, etc., but you actually intrinsically don't have a major passion for the sciences at all. And it really comes down to wanting to have an impact and be around people. And that's why you've had that as an ambition. So for me, it then really opened up that scope then. And, through wonderful support from my parents, it was a case of, think about what you could do next in your life, and you don't need to make those decisions now. But if you take opportunities, it gives you experiences to then allow you to navigate as to where you want to be. And that's been a big part of my teens, but also my 20s, is being able to take the opportunities, and very much from a standpoint that it's a very competitive market in terms of jobs and building your career, and in that graduate space as well. And I've always thought with the greatest amount of humility that if you just do what everyone else does, you only get as far as everyone else. So I've always thought, if it means working full-time and a part-time job whilst doing full-time uni, and if that's what gets you ahead in life, then it's absolutely worth it. And for me, it's definitely been that case of, what's my point of difference as well. If we think back to the COVID pandemic, and everyone's got stories as to how their lives, whether it's personally or professionally, were impacted. And in 2020 and 21, for someone who had started his career in sport a couple of years prior, you're seeing the industry that you love being a part of, you're passionate about and want to grow a career in, stagnant.
Yeah, on its knees.
And on its knees. And you go, what's my point of difference? How do I get ahead? And that's, for me, the postgraduate MBA is what came into that, is how do you compete with people who've been in the industry for 10, 15, 20 years, have more impressive resumes than you, know more about the industry than you do, but how do you build yourself up in competition with them? So it's always been very much that underlying piece of take the opportunities, and attitude's a huge part. A bit of a just do it mentality, say yes, figure it out later. There's always a way to make something happen, to get it done. But that for me has always been an intrinsic value in terms of how I like to live my life. And when you look back on your achievements, you've got to do so with humility and understanding of what you put in to get yourself to that point. But that's got to serve as motivation for the future as well. And that's, it's a proud position to be in as well. But at the same time, that can change in a heartbeat, and you can't take anything for granted in life. And being proud, but also understand the privileged positions that you do get to be in and how that takes you to different opportunities in life is important.
It's a great message, and I know I said to you beforehand that I draw a fairly long bow between the conversations I have with people on the podcast and financial planning, but that message for people who are graduating, I think about my own kids. I've got one that's graduating from year 12 at the moment, and also clients and kids of clients making the decision about what they do. And the message for us, again, financial planning is not really financial planning. A lot of it's lifestyle planning. Yeah. It's about making the decisions that will set you up for the future. And the common theme, and you've said it a couple of times, is sometimes you've got to take opportunities. You're not quite sure where they'll actually lead, but you've got to be moving forward. You've got to be taking a chance, saying yes, taking opportunities when they present themselves. And that's how you do actually set yourself apart from the rest of the pack. When you did graduate, did you go straight into uni? Did you go straight into studies? Did you have a gap year? What did you do?
So for me, I've been this is my 12th year out of school, to be technical, and I've worked full time for 11 of them. And that's once again been intrinsically from a standpoint of, to get yourself ahead, you need to do something different. Can't follow the pack. You need to be able to lead the pack. And so for me, very fortunate. I started in 2013 with Apple and progressed my way through a couple of different roles, and that took me into a full time capacity rather quickly.
So you were working with Apple straight out of school?
Straight out of school, yes.
Okay. And studying alongside working with Apple?
Yeah, that's correct. And my very first job was working at a tavern in Brisbane called the Paddo Tavern, one of the great watering holes in Brisbane.
Yep.
And combining that part-time with Apple part-time, and then also your full-time studies, it was a 50-plus hour a week commitment from a work standpoint, but then that built in very quickly when I was able to move full-time with Apple. And
what did you do at Apple?
So I firstly started on the Genius Bar, as many people we might know if you stepped into an Apple store, very much looking at that servicing piece, interacting with customers, and that was phenomenal. To have that opportunity at 18 to be able to work at a multinational organisation and see how they operate, what their processes are, gives you phenomenal life insight and a really privileged position. And so I was able to be in that space for just under 2 years, and then I was able to move then into the business consulting stream, which took myself into a full-time capacity. And then
business consulting at Apple?
At Apple.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's right. And in that time, I'm still doing my studies full-time in an undergraduate space. And for me, it was definitely that mentality of, right, you're trying to build a career here, you're trying to make a name for yourself at 19, 20, 21 to build that CV so you can be that point of difference when it comes to post-graduation. But then at the same time as well, your studies are what's going to underpin many of your opportunities into the future. So that was a good balancing act. And in some respects, I got to keep looking for those opportunities, because if you think of stemming out of the school days when I was wanting to do medicine, and then was like, oh, geez, I don't really know what I want to do, but I'll do 2 degrees that are very broad, very vague in many respects, because I'll just keep my options open. That's where you put your hands up for different internships. Had an experience with Deloitte in 2018, and that was more down that consulting, that strategy route, and that looked appetizing for the future. Speaking to different connections and a willingness to reach out and try and even attend networking events and go along by yourself and put your hand up. My name's Ed, and try and learn from people within the industry has always been a bit of a strategy of mine. And starting towards then the back end of those undergraduate studies, I was then fortunate to get some of those sporting experiences, and whether it was an opportunity for a couple of months with the GC 2018 Commonwealth Games, and then even furthermore so in greater depth then with Touch Rugby League Australia in a couple of casual positions. And then it did end up elevating to the point where I'd work Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 as such. With Apple, I'd then go 4 nights a week with Touch Rugby, and then be able to be a part of that ecosystem. And then your weekends, in many respects, you'd try and fit a social life in, but you spent most of your time doing your studies. Yep. And it was intense. It was full on. But
do you regret any of it?
None at all. Absolutely. Do I recommend it? That's a different question. And because it is absolutely very inhibiting in terms of the lack of sleep, or I like to describe myself as an early bird and a night owl. But once again, I don't regret a single part of it.
So what would you do differently if you were giving advice to someone to maybe follow in the same vein? What advice would you give them?
Yeah, the biggest thing I'd say is you always got to put yourself first, and I say that you got to believe that and intrinsically have that as part of your life, but do so with humility. You know, you can, in life, jobs come and go, family, whether it's naturally or unnaturally, and I'm very fortunate to be in an incredible family setup, but I know it's not the case for everyone, but that can change. Your friends come and go, partners come and go. The only thing that intrinsically in life can always stay the same is yourself. So if you can't put yourself first and make sure that you're enjoying your life, making the most of it, and you're happy with that, and having the experiences that make life fulfilling, then you almost got to look at that barometer yourself and go, am I doing the right thing? And through my 20s, I've sacrificed a lot in the sense of the travel piece, and I've always...
Did you feel like you were sacrificing at the time or not?
At the time, no, because at the time it was very much, you're so intrinsically linked in terms of, right, this is what I want to do, this is what I want to achieve. And I wouldn't change any of it in terms of that intent that I had, but maybe your execution, you change a bit, where you might look at it, or maybe I'll try and do that extra holiday, or try and make the most of your 20s more so in terms of the holidays, the experiences in life. But I've also had that standpoint as well as, there's a lot of that saying of you have fun in your 20s to then settle down in your 30s. And I've always tried to have a bit of a mindset that you work hard in your 20s to then be able to enjoy your 30s. And that's intrinsically led into a lot of the decisions that I've made. But it's that balancing act in life. We all talk about a work-life balance, and that can always look so different. But it's that barometer check. Are you really enjoying what you're doing? Is it taking you the places that you wanted to? But are you also making the most of life and having those travel experiences and being able to immerse yourself in different opportunities? And sport for me has always been an outlet in that respect. That's always been a consistent theme, whether it's been team sports, individual pursuits. When it comes to sport, that's always been that really nice grounding feeling for me, is being able to be a part of those environments where you're around other people socially, and of course it keeps you very healthy and fit. There's wonderful benefits from doing so. But throughout that piece, and what my advice would be, is always make sure that you have that constant reflection piece, that constant barometer, because whatever your hamster wheel looks like, it's very easy to get caught on it. And always, whether it is one or two jobs, or whether you're doing some studies or something else, we can all wake up in the morning, go do it, come home and go to sleep at night, and sometimes not always sit back and reflect, and is this exactly how I want to live my life? And for me, it's definitely a life of absolutely no regrets, and wanting to make the most of it, and knowing that you've got to work hard to get places, but also at the same time make sure you enjoy it in the process as well, and celebrate your wins. Yeah,
I've got a sense that that is probably a unique component of your personality, that you're driven in that respect. I think that it is... I don't think that it's innate in everyone to actually have that drive and self-reflection and the awareness. I think what a lot of people struggle with is that, as you said, that sort of self-awareness, the ability to be able to maybe detach from their own situation a little bit to say, is this what I actually want to do? And I think that idea of balance, I hear that a lot, like the balance is... I think it's kind of a misnomer in my mind, that there is, like, for myself and for any of the sort of younger people out there, I'm probably talking to my kids here, that that balance sort of goes in waves. Like I find that most people will have spurts of energy and effort in particular areas. Sometimes you've got a deep dive, whether it be into your studies or into your work or into a particular project that you're on. And this idea of perfect alchemy in your health and your business and your family, one of them at every point in your life is going to be slightly out of balance. And I think the superpower comes in the ability to be able to sort of assess that and go, okay, yeah, I've got to actually have some time off. I've got to go and spend some time with family here, or work or studies are going to require me to go all in and say yes to this opportunity that we're with right now.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's been a driving motivation for me, is really you build those foundations in life where you can then set yourself up to then enjoy different experiences, and that's been an intrinsic driving factor for me in my 20s. But at the same time, you make a fantastic point about that balance. It's always changing, and I don't think it's something that you could sit back and always quantify and go, right, I spend this many hours a week on this and this many hours a week on that. Life if it's that structured, you'll not enjoy it. But it is always that constant piece of accepting that nothing's perfect, but also that very much that willingness to be understanding of how you perform in different parts of your life, and always having that constant barometer check, that pulse check to go, how am I doing? What could I do better in this space? But adopting that attitude to always want to push yourself, always wanting to do better, but acknowledge you're human also.
Yeah, so all of those qualities that you've talked about ultimately led you in 2022 to move to Geelong.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, you're correct. Yep, absolutely.
Yep. And get a gig with AFL Barwon. Talk to me about how that actually eventuated and ultimately why the move and why AFL Barwon.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the years, to go back a bit, the years prior to that, I was working with Touch Rugby League Australia across 2 different general manager positions from 2018 into 2021. And in that time, I'd started in Brisbane, moved to Sydney as part of a long-term project. And then COVID hit 7 months into the project. And what felt like almost overnight for so many people in March 2020. Everyone has a March 2020 story.
Yeah.
And it was a case of that project stopped. And the Queensland borders were closing in 24 hours. And having to sit down and have a conversation with your housemate that you moved into 1 month prior and say, hey, I'm leaving. I've got to get back to Brisbane because that's where HQ is. The borders are closing, and by the way, I'm going tomorrow morning. And it was a challenging conversation to have, and in many respects, that kicked off really what was then 2 challenging years ahead, where extremely fortunate to work the whole way through. I didn't have, I wasn't in that space where I think some people really were challenged, where you were then out of work or lost your job, etc. I was able to maintain that and therefore always continue to have that grounding and that purpose. But for me, moving into 2021, and there was a time there in the middle of 2021 where half the country's in lockdown, and what felt like at times, depending on the states, you're in and out of lockdowns, and the sports industry was going through its second year of a really challenging situation where we didn't know what was coming next, how long would this last for. And it was a really challenging dynamic. And I know even from talking to people, especially in this part of the world, I was living in Queensland at the time, and we had absolutely nothing compared to what so many in Victoria went through. And I know even now in the back end of 2024, sometimes when the topic raised, it's a raw one still for people. And that's a really conscious piece, is that people have interpreted that experience in so many different ways. And for me, it really then, whilst it being a really challenging period, it then came back to, okay, what's my driving motivations, and what do I want to see when things start to return to normal, what that new normal was going to be, and what's my point of difference. And that's what then really drove me into starting my MBA, because I needed that point of difference. And I kicked that off in October 2021 with the Australian Institute of Business. And I was really fortunate. Last night I was a part of a Q&A panel with them in Melbourne at one of their networking events, and I was able to reminisce on exactly this time and what drove me into it. And in reflection, it was that piece then what drove me then into firstly a move to Canberra and taking on an executive officer role in athletics, and it then diversified my experience further then as well by being able to see a different sport, one that is intrinsically at its core very elite. Success is defined by a 100th of a second or a centimetre, and that's very challenging for elite athletes. It can be one that's, you are the champion, you are the one succeeding, and if you come second, then you're not first. And it was a very different sporting mindset. And for me, from a professional standpoint, from that strategic leadership, it gave me a really good insight as to, okay, a different sport. I'd grown up, or I suppose it started my career at Touch Rugby League that was very intrinsically community and social. I've then had that elite mix. And then what then led to about the middle of 2022 when I ended up moving to Victoria and then starting my role with the AFL, it really came from looking for what was that next opportunity. I was in an 8-month contract with athletics, and extremely fortunate that they liked the work that I was doing, that they wanted to offer me the opportunity to stay. But for me, it was really that, I wanted something else. I wanted that challenge that was going to be a long-term one as well, and one that came with that certainty. And by mid-2022, we started seeing the industry start to reopen again, roles open up. And for me, I was really open as to what that next step looked like, because I knew that to be in the sports industry and to grow in it, you can't be narrow-minded. You have to be open and willingness to take different opportunities. And so for me, it was engaging in different processes and trying to understand where different roles lined. So networking, being able to apply for different jobs, but really try a lot of different spheres, tap into those connections of people that you knew in the industry to try and learn from them and take their advice. And then, really fortunate by going through a process with the AFL that it was in a significant period of change across the state of Victoria in 2022 when it came to organisational structures and what the leadership positions look like in different country football netball regions. And right place, right time in some respects. When the Barwon opportunity came up, I was in that pipeline interviewing and looking for that next strategic leadership position, and then was able to put myself forward, put my hand up for the role that I'm in today. And it feels like yesterday, even having this conversation with you this morning, it feels like yesterday that this all happened, but was able to successfully progress through that process. But something that it really taught me was when life gets challenging, and it always will be, whether it's personally, whether it's professionally, you've always got to keep thinking about why you're doing what you're doing and what's the value you see in what you're doing. And if you don't see the value, something's got to change. And for me, it was really trying to build through those challenging years. Right, the NBA is going to be a point of difference for me, but also at the same time, how am I going to evolve my career to get myself into that next long-term opportunity that will sit really aligned with how I see myself wanting to grow in the industry. And being, in so many respects, you've got to be there at the right place, right time, and be the willingness to take the opportunities. And that lined up really well with the end of my stint for 8 months with athletics in Canberra. And then I find myself in Geelong leading AFL Barwon towards the back end of the 2022 season. And it was a really good insight. It was a baptism of fire in so many respects when you come in that time of year. But that was brilliant because it gave you the first-hand look of what happens in the region, a region that's really rich, and there's a lot of phenomenal history that comes well before me. And being able to come in and now be the person who can lead that, who can respect that history, but also advance the sports of football and netball is a true privilege.
So you had a little bit of exposure, or a lot of exposure in Brisbane with the Lions as you were growing up. But what did you know about AFL, the Barwon region, and also Geelong in general before you moved here? Had you been to Geelong? Did you know much about it?
So I knew one person in Geelong.
Who was it?
And funny enough, it was a ex-colleague of mine who, back in 2022, so it was leading into the piece of then applying for different jobs, and one of them being at the AFL, that I did a 5-day stint working at the Australian Grand Prix in Melbourne, and that opportunity, very much speaking to how networking works within the sports industry, came from in 2021 and 22. I did 2 4-week stints whilst being a part of the previous full-time jobs at the Australian Open, so working for Tennis Australia as a customer experience manager. And through those opportunities and taking annual leave from those jobs to go do other jobs was really an approach for me of trying to build up your network and trying to build your experience at a time where opportunities were really thin. So for me, it was definitely through that I then got the opportunity to work at 2 Australian Opens, work at a Grand Prix, and that added to the resume in so many respects, but it builds that depth of experience and in terms of strategy and how you intrinsically apply that to my roles in the future, including the one that I'm in today. But one of the team members I worked with at the Grand Prix lived in Geelong and was commuting up as part of her involvement as part of our team, and that was it. I knew no one else in Geelong. I knew of Geelong, knew of the Barwon region, had never visited. So when I moved down in June 2022 and started in the job, every single meeting that I was going to, every field, every club, you were punching it into Apple Maps and trying to find your way around.
Had you been to Geelong before or not?
No, never been to Geelong. No, never been to Geelong before. So it was very much a case of you had to learn the landscape very quickly. And when it came to Geelong and the Barwon region, coming in June 2022, a time of immense change, and also a time where there was a lot taking place, of course, mid-season. Learning the landscape and meeting the people was a crucial priority from day one. And unfortunately, over the years, I've done a lot of work remotely in Melbourne, whether it's been in different sports, flying down in different roles. And so I've spent a lot of time in and around, say, Melbourne as a city. So that move to Victoria compared to, say, my moves to Sydney and Canberra, I felt like I knew the city reasonably well, but then also you knew a lot of people, and that made the move quite an easy one. But at the same time as well, my patch and where I'm working is in Geelong, and I knew essentially almost no one, and I knew nothing about the region. So, and that was a big thing as part of the role. I came in at the time and I was 27, hadn't worked in footy before, hadn't worked in netball before, not from the region, and understandably a few question marks. People saying, "Geez, who's this kid?" He seems like he's a day out of high school.
Yeah.
But that was a real big part for me was, you have to be able to respect the history, what's come before you, but then you're in that position of responsibility to be able to take the two sports forward. But it's people who enable that to happen. And that was one of my biggest priorities my first 100 days was meet as many people as possible, get to know the region as fast as possible. And that then has enabled a foundation for then me to be able to then bring my skill sets, be able to bring my expertise and experience from other roles, and then intrinsically apply that here with that external lens as I'm someone who's been quite new to the region.
Yeah, and I was thinking as you were talking about relationships, again, this is a common theme on a lot of the podcasts. I spoke about a presentation I did a couple of years ago, which was on the long game of relationships. Essentially, it was about the importance, the third reward of building relationships, and how some people do find it very difficult or can't see the value in actually creating those connections that potentially don't offer anything that and maybe are done selflessly in the first instance, but when you sort of look back with the benefit of hindsight, you start to connect the dots between those your friend who was from Geelong that probably gave you some insight in what the Geelong region was all about. It is, again, another skill to anyone actually out there listening about saying yes to everything, but also the importance of pressing the flesh, as my grandfather would say, introducing yourself to people, drawing the lines of connection, and thinking about how I can actually support someone else and be the ultimate connector. I think that I talk about it a lot from a business point of view, that one of our superpowers as a business is that we are fantastic connectors of people. And Peter, my father, who we spoke about beforehand, that is without a doubt the thing that has seen him succeed in business and in the Geelong community is his fantastic building relationships, maintaining relationships, and connecting people with their needs. So finding 2 people, 3 people that have a need and joining them for no other reason other than he knows that long term will benefit the community and the business and the people that he's involved with. You were talking a little bit about the history and respecting. We'll get to your role specifically, but I made a couple of interesting notes. I don't know whether I mentioned this to you at the lunch we went to, but going back to when Peter, my father, had set up the Geelong and District Coaches Association, and Peter, a little bit of maybe not useless information, but some people know this, that Peter was a school teacher. When he finished as a school teacher, he went and did a grad dip in sports management with a view that he was going to move into sports management. I think he had some interviews with the Geelong Supercats. He applied for what is Mick Turner's job at Mick Turner's job at the Geelong Falcons. And he actually did that grad dip with a young David Matthews, who is the CEO of GWS, and was also, I think, had the equivalent of your current role now, but for the Geelong Football League. So David Matthews was the CEO of the Geelong Footy League, and prior to him, it was Don Matheson, who the Matheson medal. Yep. And so I start to run the sort of these lines of long term, the long game of connections. Don Matheson was also involved with the St Mary's Football Club. Don Matheson gave Peter, my father, his first gig in the Geelong Football League with a role at St Mary's. Peter then went on to coach, and as I said to you off air, Peter has, and I think it was only in the last couple of days, the AFL Barwon Awards had his the Coach of the Year award, which is named after him, awarded for the 20th odd year in a row. And again, it's worth just making that point of the legacy that comes before you, but just again emphasise just how many people that we essentially stand on the shoulders of in the community and with sort of local football. So I don't mean to put you under pressure, mate. You've got big shoes to fill.
Yes.
And you've got obviously lots and lots of opportunities. So let's talk about your role at AFL Barwon. And what's in the scope of your responsibility, and what are you actually trying to achieve? What does success look like for you at AFL Barwon?
Yeah, it's two themes. So firstly, strategy. You are very much the leader in my shoes and being able to determine what the future looks like. And you've got to be able to have that strategy. It's a constant call that I hear from, whether it's our club stakeholders or others within the community, is what's our plan for the future? And that's a really intrinsic part of what my role is to be able to lead that. And you lead that not as an I, there's no I in team. And there's a phenomenal team that sits around me, whether it's my internal team, whether it's the AFL Barwon Commission, who are our governance board, and then it's other stakeholders, including the clubs. Everyone's got to be a part of that. But that first theme of my role is really strategy, is to what are we driving forward? What does the future of our sport looks like in 1, 5, 10 years' time? And that's important because not only does strategy give people that outlook and clarity as to what to expect in the future, but it grounds people in terms of the value of what we're delivering in the now. And it's very easy to have a strategic plan document that you do up, you polish, and you put it in the top drawer of your desk, and it collects dust for the next 3 years. But it's being able to actually action on that, be very clear with your stakeholders as to what the deliverables are, and then being able to showcase that in terms of how you then lead your organisation and how you lead your team and you deliver on that. So for me, strategy is that first part, is what do our sports look like in the future, and understanding what our role is as part of that. As the regional body, you're setting that strategy in collaboration with your club stakeholders, in collaboration with your community partners, to make sure that each one of them see value in what you're leading, what you're driving from that regional body level, but then being able to intrinsically have their own ways that they can tap in and be a part of that, because it very much takes everyone within the community to realise that success. And then the second part to it is relationships. We've touched on it quite a fair bit already so far this morning, but relationships are that absolute underpinning piece. If we look at the different tiers of government, whether it is the relationships with clubs, their committee members, and so many throughout the community, whether it's a wellbeing program that AFL Barwon is leading to something else that we might be driving, an initiative to try and grow participation, if you don't have the opportunity to be able to present that to the relevant stakeholders and be able to drive the right relationships to get those outcomes, then the people who actually miss out are the participants. At its absolute core, that's why we do all what we do, is to provide opportunities for men and women, boys and girls, to be able to come and play the sports of football and netball at those senior and junior levels. And we understand the value of sport so significantly in terms of the roles that it plays in people's lives, in terms of the relationships that it attributes, the opportunities that it can open up for people. And that sense of belonging, that sense of community is so important. Our clubs, our 51 within the Barwon region, are more than just places to kick a footy or shoot a netball. There's so much more to that. And that's where we see our position as the regional body. And for me, being in the proud position that I'm in, being able to lead that is really themed around what's your strategy, what are you driving, what are those end outcomes, and then how do you combine that with those relationships that enable that to happen.
So you mentioned like some of the enormous change that's occurred over the course of probably the last 4 or 5 years, sort of post-COVID. Looking forward, what are some of the biggest challenges in terms of local sport participation? Where are the risks? Where are the risks that you are trying to head off in terms of participation and sort of community involvement?
It's twofold, firstly. So you firstly look at it from a standpoint of it is a saturated sporting market now at the community level, and that's really good for the participant, because what it means is there's so many different options and so many different ways to play sports. If we even look at the sports of football and netball, it's not just about what happens on a Saturday. There's other shorter forms, faster forms, indoor, outdoor, and that's brilliant for the participant, because it starts to then accommodate to people's life schedules, their demands, contact v non-contact. So that's a really intrinsically a fantastic benefit for the participant. But what it does is it means that we as a regional body, myself and my role, and the two sports that we lead within the region, is having that innate ability to be able to keep up with the times and being able to continuously challenge ourselves to face that challenge, to make sure that you stay relevant and you're able to support the clubs. Because if we aren't able to provide those formats, those frameworks for people to be able to adopt and be a part of, then the two sports will go backwards. And we're very proud and we're very privileged that we have a phenomenal football netball history within the Barwon region, but that's something that can't be taken for granted. And we can't sit back and look at that history or look at what the status quo is today and assume that it will continue to in the future, because it won't if we have that attitude. So that's the first part to it, is It's what does that market look like, community sport, the offerings, and there are so many of those offerings compared to 5, 10, 20 years ago now, and being able to stay relevant is really important. But the second part to it then is if you think of what happens outside the sporting ecosystem that has the influences, we think of cohesion of society, and we've come out of a couple of years where that's been challenged in many respects when people haven't had that social contact. We're seeing in so many different ways now, people seeing community clubs as a phenomenal place to feel like they're a part of a local community. It gives some people that purpose, that value. What are they striving towards every week in terms of what brings them intrinsic enjoyment in life? But then tied into that is, of course, so many other factors as well. We see the changes in the economy and how sudden that has been felt by so many people in the last 12 to 24 months. And that, of course, has an impact as well. We look at cost of living. We look at so many other factors in terms of how people value their health and well-being these days. And we see that as a driving factor in terms of what gets people into sport and being active. But it's also not something you can take for granted as well. I look at parkrun as a phenomenal concept. It's volunteer-led 5-kilometre run on a Saturday morning. At its core, very simple in terms of how you engage. But what you see is parkrun now is global in many countries, and it's phenomenal the community that it has built. And it is that absolute link between something that's really accessible, it's open to the majority of people, and it provides that opportunity for people to engage in different ways. And that's something in terms of that mindset that we've got to continue to have in terms of what we lead in our region, is that ability to be very open with our strategy, be able to intrinsically manage that with the relationships and allow them to input and influence what the future looks like, but understanding what's succeeding, understanding what our opportunities are, but also being very open in what our challenges are. We can't sit back. Nothing's perfect, and you can't pretend that it ever is. You've always got to be looking for how can we shift a needle here? How can we change something over there to drive some better outcomes?
Yeah, I think one of those that comes to mind in terms of, I suppose it is a responsibility that you have in turn looking after sort of the AFL Barwon region, netball, football, goes back to the lunch we went to with Michelle Gertz and Read the Play, and just how much of an influence local sporting communities can have on mental health and on the challenges, the obvious challenges that we're all seeing as a parent and as a business owner that actually sees clients with their children with challenges. That to me is twofold. It's one of the greatest risks are sometimes the greatest opportunities, aren't they? Crisis presents opportunity, and the sporting community offers an amazing platform to be able to get that messaging across. And I know Michelle and her work at Read the Play has been phenomenal in sort of rolling out some of that support, which obviously AFL Barwon is supportive of. Are there any other things? Again, I'm probably harbouring on some of the maybe perceived negative issues associated with involvement in sport. The one that comes to mind is there's been a pretty big push towards the likes of soccer. And one of the things that, as an observer of that, as a parent, it is the concern with football, head injuries, traumatic brain injuries. How do you think about that? I know it's a fairly broad scope, but how do you think about that in terms of maintaining sort of safety and well-being for people when they're actually participating in sports in the community, in the region?
Yeah, it always is at the moment, and it needs to always continue to be number one priority. If the safety and well-being of all your participants, and that of course extends to your coaches, your umpires, your volunteers, your community members, everyone needs to be a part of an environment in which it's safe to be a part of. And that talks about on the field, off the field, on the court, off the court as well. And those environments are so important in terms of what we intrinsically drive and for us try to set the standards from the get-go as well. But that's where we've got to be able to continue to be very much at the forefront of what the future of the sports look like, to make sure that people see the sports as welcoming places, ones that they can come and play and feel safe to be a part of, not just in terms of the contact, in terms of a game and what takes place in terms of passages of play, but also off the field as well, and what those cultures look like. Are they inclusive? Because there's so much that feeds into people's perspectives and feeds so much into their own participation and why people play a sport or why they're a part of a community group. Some of the biggest reflections that I take is, why do people turn away or stop playing something or stop being part of a community group? And in so many respects, I look at it and go, the value that they saw in why they signed up in the first place has obviously diminished, or that value has changed, or that value concept for them has altered. And as a result, you then got to be able to understand that. Why has that changed? And for any parent, absolutely, and rightly so, and it should be for every person, is that health, safety, that well-being aspect is so important to be able to understand, is what am I playing in or what am I a part of? Is this a safe environment for me to be a part of? And that's where the sports always, it's a challenge for all sports to be able to always constantly evolve, to be able to make sure that you are providing those safe environments, and you're able to also reassure people that when things don't go right or things don't go well, there are the right mechanisms in place to be able to support, whether that is the intrinsic player, whether it is a club committee member, for example, being able to make sure that that whole ecosystem supports itself, though, so that sports involvement continues to be a really attractive place for people to come and be a part of, as it is something, as we discussed even off air this morning, is the real link for so many people within a community.
Yeah, well, you've got a lot on your plate, mate. I go back to when I was playing footy, and some of the things that you now have in your purview of responsibility are enormous compared to days gone by, where I absolutely loved being part of the sporting club and Bell Park particularly, but there probably wasn't. The evolution that I've seen is this real emphasis and focus on supporting people at every single level, you know, from not only having junior programs to try and have a pathway for, future members of a club, but supporting everyone at player level, at member level, at committee level, and then, all of the involvement that people have from a business level in local sporting communities. Maybe let's talk about some of the maybe key initiatives. Is there anything happening in the near future that people listening maybe should be aware of? I was having a bit of a look at some of the things that are going on in sort of Barwon, the Barwon region. Is there anything coming up that listeners should be aware of, either for the coming year or anything special that you've got in terms of projects that are on the whiteboard at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. And probably the best way to try and frame that is back to dusting that document off and making sure it doesn't sit in the top drawer of the desk, being our strategic plan. And it's something that we're really holding close to every decision that we make is, does this align to our strategic plan? And now that was a big engagement period that we went through in 2023 to be able to understand what our strategic plan should look like, and embracing the viewpoints of so many of our stakeholders is what influenced what that plan looks like from 24 to 26. And if I almost refer to the pillars of that, so firstly, club and community engagement, and that itself sits at the absolute core of our most important stakeholders, being our 51 clubs. Without our clubs, there is no AFL Barwon. It's as simple as that. And they are extremely important in the role that they play within the community to enable participation, but also to enable that sense of community that we've spoken about, and how that clubs are more of a place these days than ever before for someone to not just kick a footy, not just shoot a netball, but feel like that they're a part of something bigger, and to be able to get the support that they desire. And those responsibilities and what we see, especially in the space of volunteerism, is so much bigger than what it used to be. And I think it's a real reflection of changing times in terms of that clubs have such an influence in terms of people's lives and the roles it plays in communities, that what it does is it then brings about more initiatives, more things that can be done. So finding that balance and how we support clubs in that space, and then therefore how they connect with the wider community, is so important. For us, naturally, participation is at a cornerstone of everything that we do. And that speaks to our second pillar, which is strong and sustainable football and netball. And that's really talking about what are our offerings. We've just been talking before about ways to play our sports. How does that look like? Indoor, outdoor, the forms of game during the week, on a weekend, etc. How can people be a part of our two sports and do so in a manner that's going to bring a lot of value to them as a participant, both on and off the field and the court? And that really sits under that one. we all know, of course, and the backbone of so much of what we do is the facilities and the environments. And that refers to not just the bricks and mortar, but once again, the culture. What's that fostering within those local communities? And it's so important to make sure that they are inclusive. For so many of our sports, there's been ways to play in the past. There's been, parts of our community that haven't always engaged in our sports, and how we continue to adapt and how we continue to evolve to make sure that we support multicultural communities. We have equitable opportunities between the sports of football and netball, as well as offerings for men and women across both sports as well. That's really important into the future as well. Communications, partnerships are absolutely critical. It goes without saying that we can't do what we do if it isn't for phenomenal community partners across the board. We've spoken about Read to Play already this morning. One of our incredible partners, sponsored and underpinned by Kempe Engineering, and they've been partnering with AFL Barwon and the clubs for over 20 years now, and to really delivering and supporting that notion that community clubs are so much more than a place to kick a footy and shoot a netball, but support those with those foundational learnings and make sure in their formative years we provide them with the right support. And that speaks so much to the partnerships piece and how that's communicated and what our role is there. And then the last one, it goes so intrinsically with so many organisations. You speak so highly and so proudly, of course, about the people that work in this building. And for us, it's that resilient and resourced region. And we see, because of those changing times and those evolutions of what clubs mean within communities and being able to support what that looks like, we've got to have the right team internally, and we've got to have a really good group of commissioners who are driving and leading what that governance looks like in the region. But at the same time as well, that's supporting clubs and making sure that they have the right people, but also the people within their environments that are going to support what their club wants to achieve as well. So I know that touches on a lot of different points, but it speaks really highly to what once again, what is our purpose. And for us, we've got to be very mindful of that as well, is that there are so many key enablers of what takes place for football and netball within the community. And for us, being able to lead that from the forefront is an absolute privilege. And we've got to understand what our position is with that, but also make sure that we're leaders and driving what the future looks like.
It's funny when you were talking about the partners. I was just brought up and looking at some of the official AFL Barwon partners, and just about all of them, and again I won't read them all out, but you mentioned Kempe, Corio Bay, Geelong Addy, the Cats, Hamlin. There's WorkSafe, the Geelong Business Excellence Awards that I was at Thursday night. Just about every one of those is represented in that format as well. You can see just the crossover between just all aspects of business and sporting life in Geelong. And I know that's the theme I wanted to convey in today's, and I think you've done an exceptional job of doing that. You mentioned the staff, the commissioners. Obviously, you're not on your own in running this show. Who else have you got in supporting you in looking after AFL Barwon?
Yeah, I think in addition to the incredible team of staff and commissioners, it even goes that level above us in terms of that wider ecosystem for the sport. So AFL National and AFL Victoria, and also Netball Victoria, Netball Australia as well. They're pivotal impactors in terms of how we continue to grow our sports, but also sustain the sports as well. It's not all just about numbers, and it's not just all about can we get more participants. It's also acknowledging that so many parts of our region have different forms of equitability and need different resources and different strategies. So you need to be able to tap into those state and national bodies for them to be able to provide their expertise and resources. But then further to that as well, and it comes back to the point earlier that all of this doesn't happen without the 51 clubs and the communities that all underpin them and very much represent what they look to intrinsically deliver, not just in terms of football and netball programs, but all of those other offerings as well. And then further to, yes, our community partners and the others who so generously support the work of AFL Barwon and the clubs. It really is one big ecosystem that enables this all to happen. If an element of that ecosystem was to drop out, the support or more so how things would run within the region would be noticed very quickly. And what it shows is that the connections, the relationships are so important in terms of driving that strategy, but it's also got to be that a collective approach. Everyone has a role as part of that. And it is a proud position to be in where you can be that regional leader to be able to drive so much of that and be able to lead so much of that and be the face of so much of that. But it comes with that immense responsibility, nothing you can take for granted. And at the same time, you've got to also be very wary and also understanding what the challenges are in the future and make sure your work can be progressive to that. But at the same time as well, respectful of the history and make sure that we understand and learn from that as well.
Well, I think in the short time that you have been in that role, and again, this is the second time you and I have met, but
Correct.
in looking at the influence that you've actually had on the region in your role and how highly people speak of you, and you've mentioned, and I think it's clear to anyone listening to this, the qualities that you bring to that role in terms of willingness to connect, the willingness to say yes, the willingness to take on responsibility, but also understand and respect history and community. Absolutely, hats off to you. I think it is, again, I'm totally biased in that I love the Geelong community, as
Absolutely.
people listening to this podcast will know. I love the Geelong sporting community, the Geelong business community, and so it is a heavy weight and a heavy burden that you carry, but I think you do it with great distinction, with great articulation, and you should be very proud for what you've been involved in. Just hold on one sec.
Another podcast at 11.
Okay.
With Mel from InvestSense.
Okay, thanks. Cool. Yeah. So Luke Massey, who a little side note. So I should have said at the beginning, whenever I swear on the podcast or we say something we shouldn't, I make a little footnote for Luke Massey, who is our editor, to actually to take that out. Luke Massey is, if we go back to the All Abilities
Yes.
program that exists in AFL Barwon.
Of course.
Luke Massey did a fantastic documentary on I believe it was the Dragons All Ability team. So shout out to Luke. Anyone who wants to check that out, we can probably pop that in the show notes. But just another, I suppose, little segue or side note of just how much AFL Barwon does, but also I didn't know Luke Massey until I saw his documentary, and Luke Massey, through the Geelong community, through his involvement with the AFL All Abilities team in that documentary, then started to do some work with us from a business point of view, and now
great.
is a very good friend and has helped us out enormously with his podcast and some of the work that we do. Again, just another little example of how interconnected the Geelong community is through sport.
Absolutely, and it is a phenomenal community in that respect, and there are so many incredible individuals who so quietly go about doing their work, and they do it for phenomenal reasons, whether there's something that's personally touched them in their own lives, or they see an opportunity where their skill sets or their experience can make a difference, and that's what has really resonated with me. Something that really stood out in my first 100 days, for example, in terms of getting to know people and getting to know the region, was the phenomenal people who give so much of their time, give so much of their enthusiasm to enable so many people and within our region to participate in our sports, but also be a part of those club environments and ensure that we can ensure there are no barriers to participation, there are no barriers to involvement, and it's a privileged position to be in, and I'm incredibly humbled by the comments that you just shared a couple of minutes ago. You don't do this job for thanks. You don't do it for recognition at all. I'm in the wrong job if I'm doing it for those reasons. But what brings a lot of satisfaction to me, and what intrinsically makes me proud of what we do and what we lead, is when you see incredible people like Luke and so many incredible people within the community deliver what they do and support what they do. And that's what makes doing what I do every day, and the same for our team, same for our commission, so valuable. And it's what gives us the pride, the motivation to continue doing what we do, is seeing the work that phenomenal other people lead.
That's a great message to close on, mate. Maybe I'll give you one last opportunity for any sort of closing call to action or message to our listeners. Anything else that you'd like to close on before we wrap it up? Maybe I know I'm normally talking with people who are running a business or have a product, but where can people actually find you on the interwebs or follow AFL Barwon? Where can they find you, and any closing messages?
Yeah, and firstly, thank you for the opportunity to be on today.
Pleasure, mate.
116 episodes deep. There's clearly some very good work that's been done, and I think it's a wonderful example of how the Geelong and the wider community connects together. Voice and that ability to have a conversation and discussion is so important, and it can lead to so many different thoughts and so many different opportunities. So it's a real privilege to be here today, so thank you again for the opportunity. For us, I'd say to be two closing messages. Firstly, more intrinsically straight down the line, aflbarwon.com.au is very much our hub. In terms of our 51 clubs, linking yourself as a community member to them, but also getting an insight as to what our clubs, what the region offers in terms of the way of programs, participation, etc. But the second one I'd say is, and I think it's been an intrinsic theme through our conversation this morning, is so much of life is about the opportunities that sit in front of you, and so much of life is about the attitude that you bring to that. And my biggest encouragement to anyone, whether you're someone who's thinking about getting into a sport, getting in part of a community group, trying to understand where your value is in society and what you contribute, is be comfortable in the uncomfortable, and be willingness to go and jump in the deep end, try something new, have a new opportunity. If you don't have that attitude in life to do so, then you're only missing out for yourself, and you miss out on those own experiences that you can really relish in by meeting new people and being immersed in different environments. So it's a lot of it intrinsically drives in terms of what we lead as an organisation, and what we support our community in. But it's certainly been a personal passion of mine, is take the opportunities, have the right attitude, and with that comes amazing things in life. And I think if people live their life with that element of positivity and always wanting to strive for more and support those around them in their community, then the world is certainly a better place as a result.
Beautiful. Thanks, Ed. Appreciate that. And, mate, I look forward to having you back on for round 2 some point in the near future.
Sounds terrific. Thank you again.
Thanks, mate. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you're keen to understand more about how financial advice could benefit you, follow us on Instagram, Facebook and Twitter at Burke Britton FP, or Google Burke Britton Financial Partners. Check out our client reviews, testimonials, and make a time to meet one of our certified financial planners by clicking Book Now on our website. Thanks for listening.
Any information contained in this podcast is of a general nature only. No account was taken as to the objectives, financial situation, or needs of any particular person. Therefore, before making any decision, listeners should consider the appropriateness of any information with regard to their particular objective, financial situation, needs, and seek independent advice from a licensed professional specific to their circumstances.
All right, hit it.
That translates to don't be a moron and act on what some random person says on a podcast. Take personal responsibility. Do your homework. Ask questions and speak to an actual human that knows what they're talking about before you do anything. PP Financial Solutions Proprietary Limited, trading as Burke Britton Financial Partners, are authorised representatives of AMP Financial Planning Limited, AFS licence number 232706.